You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ace, and with the support of the University of Alaska Fairbanks Department of Social Work, we gather voices of revolutionary social workers from around the world, organizers, healers, artists, and educators, people who carry stories that connect us, challenge us, and remind us what it means to be human. Each episode is an offering, a chance to slow down, listen deeply, and feel the ground beneath your feet. Come as you are, stay as long as you need, and remember, no matter your pain, somebody, somewhere feels the same. Welcome to The Circle. This episode's guest is Dr. Heliana Ramirez, a therapist and researcher focused on workplace abuse and trauma. She helps survivors move towards safety and post-traumatic growth and teaches organizations how to create conditions that support healing instead of harm. If you find something meaningful here, the best way that you can support this work is simple. Like, comment, share the episode, and subscribe to our channels. And if you want to connect, ask questions, or be a part of the conversation, please reach out, because I'd love to hear from you. All right. Welcome to another episode of The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I feel very fortunate this morning. It may be afternoon for you, but I feel very fortunate this morning for me to be joined with Dr. Heliana Ramirez. How are you today?
Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's my pleasure. I feel very grateful to share the space with you. I feel very privileged to do so. I'm joining. This is the first time I've ever used a fake background. I am traveling right now. I'm in an Airbnb with a bunch of my students. We're presenting at a NASW Alaska conference tomorrow. So we're here preparing, and then my background is just a bedroom. And so I had to get rid of it. Where are you at?
I'm in California, Califaslan, as we like to remember that this was always a part of Turtle Island and that we didn't cross the border crossed us.
Sit with that for a second. Very well said. I'm here like I said, I'm here in Anchorage, Alaska. I have a lot of history in Anchorage, and it's very familiar to be back, but it's always weird when you go back somewhere that you haven't been in a while, especially when you've been in Hawaii and going back to Alaska. So it's a little chilly here, enjoying the fall weather, but also want to just pay respect to the Alaska Native folks that were here before us, if you know what I'm saying. I think we have Alicia is supposed to join us. I don't know where she's at, if she is popping on here in just a second. I want to give her a moment. And let me just see if my live streams are going before we...
While you're looking at that, I just want to give so much love to you and your students who are about to be in NASW. We need radical social workers all the way through NASW, from a state level to a national level. And it's huge. It's huge what social workers are carrying these days. So it means so much to think about you all. And is the presentation tomorrow, or how soon is it?
Yeah, it's tomorrow afternoon. So we've been, it's hard when everybody's distant. So we saved a lot of the working group stuff for here in person, and it's been beautiful. But it's just like I was up till 2:30 in the morning last night, writing the script. But it's good. This stuff's good work. I said it's a privilege to share the space with you, but it's also a privilege for me to be here with students and to be able to share the space with them. And we have a great presentation tomorrow. It's understanding addiction through a lens of connection and disconnection, looking at it as the reason that people get hooked on drugs is not, just personal failure or a lack of good character. And, it's because they're disconnected in many different ways. And the way to healing or recovery is not just abstinence. It calls for reconnection to yourselves, to culture, to the land, to ancestry, to each other, all those things. So we have a really beautiful presentation, and they put us in the main ballroom. So we're all a little bit, I don't think everyone's participated in something that big before. So we're all a little bit anxious, but excited as well.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Is this going to be recorded?
I'll see if it is. Maybe I can put up my phone too, for sure.
I would really appreciate checking that out. I feel like that is exactly the conversation that we need to be having right now in social work, and that social work really is positioned to lead the nation, frankly, in behavioral health. And it's from that perspective that is acknowledging that connection. Hey, Alicia.
Hello. Sorry, keep going, Eliana. I love what you're saying. It's so true.
I was just excited about this presentation that I just heard about for tomorrow. and the idea of connection and what the neuroscience is telling us now about the brain and attachment, especially in early childhood, and the connections with later on different relationships with substances. Really appreciate what you all are going to bring tomorrow. I hope that it will be recorded and the rest of us can check it out.
Yeah, I'll do my best to make sure it happens. But sometimes, when I get in those situations, I forget all those little things that I'm supposed to be doing, and I just end up delivering the presentation, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I'm very excited about it, and all the things that you just mentioned are deep and heavy in what we've got going on. So, anyways, Alicia just joined us, tuned in. She's in Honoka'a, Hawaii, up on the Big Island. Sure, it's a little warmer over there.
It is beautiful today. It is just exactly as it is most days, sunny and 78 degrees.
Just like I say, people are different and beautiful in their own ways. So are different locations.
Mm-hmm.
I miss the warm weather, but Alaska for sure has its own beauty. You know what I mean? It's the fall colors. The leaves are falling. It's crispy outside, not cold enough to be frosty or snowy. So it's a great time of year, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah.
I know you have some questions, Alicia, to get us started. But before that, as I was getting ready for the podcast, I jumped on Instagram, and I actually think it made me lose my live stream. So we may not be on live streaming on Instagram because of it. But I saw some sad news. If anybody knows my story, you know that a turning point for me that changed my trajectory was I was at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I was an MSW student. And I actually really wanted to get in you have a couple electives that you can take. And I really wanted to get into this Native Hawaiian social work class. But unfortunately, it was at the same time as my required research course, which doesn't make much sense if you think about it. But anyway, so I sought something outside of the social work department for my elective. And I happened to be maybe one of the most fortunate moments of my life, fortuitous moments of my life, is that Miss Angela Davis guest taught a course that semester called American Punishment. So I had the privilege the honor to spend a semester with Miss Angela Davis. And during that time, I became exposed to all kinds of new ways, or not new ways, but different ways of thinking, different history, all kinds of things. But one of the things I did during that time was we talked a little bit about Assata Shakur. And I'd always just thought of her as Tupac's auntie. I wasn't really sure. I knew the name, but I wasn't really sure. But I picked up her autobiography, and it was, I really can't put it into words, but it was very meaningful for me, and it made me look at things much the same as Angela Davis's autobiography. It was very meaningful for me. It taught me something different. My daughter that's here with me, Naya, her middle name is Assata. Anyways, I was on Instagram this morning, and I saw a sad post. I found out that she had passed on, transitioned on to the ancestors, however we want to call it. And it made me emotional, and I wasn't even sure how to feel about it going right into here. And so part of the ways that we can use our power sometimes when you have a podcast or you're a professor is that, you can talk about things that are important to you and bring it up. For those of you who don't know about Assata Shakur, she was a member of the Black Panther Party. Later on became a part of the Black Liberation Army with Dr. Mutulu Shakur and so on. And I think she's actually Tupac's godmother, not his auntie, now that I've learned more. But she was involved in a number of different things. She was imprisoned, in which she was exonerated from the charges. But then during all that time, she got in, there was an incident on the New Jersey, on the New Jersey Turnpike. And I don't remember the year right offhand. But there was a shootout with the police. She claims that her hands were up and she was shot. But anyway, she was in prison during that time. And she was broken free, liberated from prison, however you want to call it, by Dr. Mutulu Shakur, I think Seiko Odinga, who's now free as well, and fled to Cuba, where she's been ever since. But like I said, she has an autobiography, which I want to put here in the chat. It's available just via PDF for anybody who's interested, or you can order it from Amazon or whatever. But that's her autobiography, and I would just say that it's a very important read. And if you're ever looking to broaden your perspectives, change your perspectives on what you know about history, what you know about Black liberation, Black power, things like that, I just highly, highly recommend that you look a little deeper. There's also I should have linked that in here too, but maybe I'll put it in the description afterwards, she has a kind of an autobiographical film called, what is it called? The Eyes of the Rainbow or something like that. Alicia, do you remember? Something like that. And it's on YouTube. I think it's called The Eyes of the Rainbow or something. That's worth watching as well. But I found she passed on today, and I just want to read her daughter's post here on Instagram. It says, "Our last hero has gained her wings. No worry can explain what this moment means to me. I don't remember life before fighting for her freedom and protection. Free Assata Shakur was the mantra and mission of the Shakur family. My heart and hugs are with all of my cousins scattered in the world. This is a statement from her daughter. At approximately 1:15 p.m. on September 25th, my mother, Assata Shakur, took her last earthly breath. Words cannot describe the depth of loss that I am feeling at this time. I want to thank you for her loving prayers that continue to anchor me in the strength that I need in this moment. My spirit is overflowing in unison with all of you who are grieving with me at this time. Sending much love and appreciation to you all. K. Shakur. And I just want to give a moment of silence. I know Assata Shakur meant a lot to a lot of people around the world, a lot of freedom fighters, a lot of revolutionaries. And so I just want to give a quick moment of silence to Assata Shakur. And before I turn it over to you, Alicia, I just wanted to read if you click on that link that I shared to our autobiography, it starts with an affirmation. I just want to read that and then I'll pass it over. And it's titled Affirmation, actually. It says, I believe in living. I believe in the spectrum of beta days and gamma people. I believe in sunshine and windmills and waterfalls, tricycles and rocking chairs. And I believe that seeds grow into sprouts and sprouts grow into trees. I believe in the magic of hands and in the wisdom of the eyes. I believe in rain and tears and in the blood of infinity. I believe in life, and I have seen the death parade march through the torso of the earth, sculpting mud bodies in its path. I've seen the destruction of the daylight and seen bloodthirsty maggots prayed to and saluted. I've seen the kind become the blind, and the blind become the bind in one easy lesson. I have walked on cut glass. I have eaten crow blunder bread and breathed the stench of indifference. I have been locked by the lawless, handcuffed by the haters, gagged by the greedy, and if I know anything at all, it's that a wall is just a wall and nothing more at all. It can be broken down. I believe in living. I believe in birth. I believe in the sweat of love and in the fire of truth. And I believe that a lost ship steered by tired, sick sailors can still be guided home.
The emotion that brings up is huge. And I think one thing that her daughter said really hit me this morning and made me emotional is like the unison of grief that people are feeling, but also like her revolutionary soul just feels like it's spread even further and deeper into people's just presence and lives. And I think we know that her revolutionary soul is going to continue. But yeah. Ace, did you want me to follow on with the question I had for Heliana?
Yeah, please do.
So glad to be with you again, Heliana. There were so many things from the episode of the Revolutionary Social Work podcast, which will be coming soon, that has stuck with me. But one specific thing is when you were talking about how when we're in like abusive situations and whether it be the workplace, but also applying this to, like domestic violence situations and sexual abuse situations, especially for kids, is that our nervous system is so much in that fight and flight that we sometimes don't even realize we're in that much of an abusive situation and that we're in survival mode at that point, right? And that just really stuck with me. And I was writing a bit of my book yesterday for the Circle of Self about cortisol and how we're in this prolonged elevated state of high cortisol levels and the impact that has on our bodies. But I'm just wondering if you could talk more to if we're noticing if maybe this triggers something in people's minds of maybe I need to check what kind of situation I'm in, but also if we're seeing coworkers or fellow social workers and we notice some of these things of what can we do? What should we look out for? What should we do next? I would just love to hear more of your thoughts on that.
Thank you so much. And gosh, Alicia, it's really nice to be back with you again. Like what a real treat that is. And the two of you are talking about a powerhouse couple. My gosh, I am so grateful to the work that you both do with both of these podcasts. And I'll get to the question just a second. I just want to acknowledge the love and the fight that Assata Shakur's family put into her safety, her freedom. I get shivers thinking about somebody who would be blessed with that kind of love. That kind of love is something that you can't buy. You can't commodify it. It is the real deal. And so just holding right now the grief and the sorrow and the celebration that so many people, and when her daughter talked about the cousins scattered across the earth right now, and I just kind of imagine just this love like it's encircling the earth. So thank you, Professor Ace, for starting off with that acknowledgement. Yeah, okay. So cortisol, and early childhood stuff, and then what in the heck happens in this toxic society and workplaces that we're in, because my goodness, it'll get you every single time. And so I think first of there's some good news here. The good news is that we can test our cortisol levels, and they're fairly simple saliva tests, blood tests that can be done. And so if somebody has health insurance and they're concerned, they can go in and ask their primary care physician, like, hey, I've been under chronic stress and I just want to check to see what's going on in my body. How are my cortisol levels? What are my glucose levels? Because when we are exposed to chronic cortisol, it starts to affect our adrenal glands, and it starts to affect the way that the body processes sugar. So this is part of that connecting piece between early onset diabetes and many of our communities who are facing chronic systemic interpersonal racism. So we know that we see higher rates of chronic stress-related illnesses in communities of color, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, the precursor to which are metabolic illnesses. And so we can go in and actually see markers in our blood samples and our saliva. There are some urine tests as well that can be done that check glucose. So that's one piece. The second piece is, I think, to know that our bodies were designed to restabilize after challenges and difficulty and trauma. And no matter how much trauma we have gone through, from early childhood through adulthood, we can heal. Our adrenal system can be rebalanced. Our nervous system can be toned, if you will. And excitingly, our brains can actually regrow, or not regrow, but grow new neural pathways. So even the atrophy that can happen from chronic exposure to stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, we can heal the literal brain structure. So I think keeping that hope alive is really important. But most important, I think, is get the heck away from those abusers. And abusers will not change. No matter how fancy their language might be, no matter how sophisticated their emotional manipulation tactics might be, they will not change. It's a horrifying thing, but I think we need to believe people when they tell us who they are, because they are getting something, especially in workplaces or universities or healthcare systems, where that power imbalance is very significant and they can ruin our careers. We need to take people at face value. And the first time. And for those of us who have had any kind of early childhood abuse, neglect, anything like that, we are especially vulnerable to personal dynamics. I feel like workplace abusers oftentimes, and I just want to do activation warning for the audience here, I'm going to be explicit about this. I think that workplace abusers groom us like pedophiles. I think that they send out signals, essentially like orcas, right? Or other animals that are using sonar. They're sending out signals to see whether or not our boundaries are permeable. And for those of us who are raised around abuse and neglect, we are trained early on to fawn. That's one of these nervous system responses that people don't talk about as much. There's the freeze, the fight, the flight, and then the fawning. And it can look like, and frankly, for those of us who are people of color in predominantly white institutions, this is also a survival strategy that we have to adopt and as a form of adaptation. So I would just say, and forgive me, Alicia, I feel like I'm going off on a tangent again. But anyway, I think that part of it is just self-awareness in a loving and compassionate way for our little selves that were treated badly or neglected as children, that those little selves can come up in adulthood and can actually not increase our danger, but may keep us from setting up the boundaries that we need to protect ourselves.
And would you say part of that fawning is like when we justify people's behavior and we're saying like it's just part of the job, or, they must just have had a bad day, those sort of things? Is that part of the fawning?
Absolutely. Yeah, you really called that directly. And I think in some of our communities, when we've had like chattel slavery, when we've had colonization as a part of our ancestry, our families intergenerationally had to adapt by creating terms like, or ideas, keep your head down, don't make waves, just go in, do your work. And it's a good job, mija. Like, don't, push back, don't be the problem. That was a survival strategy.
Exactly. And I think also it's tied to finances too. Like, so we're in these positions as social workers. We may not be, I mean, I think there's all ranges of salary that social workers are getting, but regardless, it's income and it's survival to pay our rent, to pay our mortgage or buy food, support our children, all of that. And so we over justify because we're dependent oftentimes on this salary and therefore dependent on having a somewhat stable relationship with our coworkers or bosses or whoever it may be. And so I think just a lot of people, maybe even social workers more so, are even more vulnerable to this because of just the work we do, the situations we're in, where a lot of people are coming from into social work. A lot of people do have trauma in their background. And like you said, can make you more susceptible to this. So I'm just so glad you talk about it and you offer support and, you know, a voice to people that may not have heard this talked about before. Talk about it for our clients, but not so much for social workers in the workplace. So yeah, thank you.
Well, I appreciate that you bring up that, like, the real, the realities that we face in the workplace as social workers. I think that there are some challenges if you look at just like a healthcare system that will have social workers and psychologists and, you know, nurses and a whole bunch of different folks. We tend to there tends to be a pecking order. I'll just be blunt about it, right? And so what can happen, I worked in Veterans Affairs for 13 years, and so it was like right up in my face. Social workers can end up feeling all sorts of different invisible power dynamics. Like, we can think about it like the Matrix. Like, yeah, let me throw back to the 90s and, you know, when the Matrix first came out. But it's real. And I am frustrated that NASW does not better prepare us to, one, understand that we're going to be facing those kind of dynamics, and two, know how to negotiate with them. So there's, I think, the larger systemic dynamics of power that goes on, but I think the other piece is that many of us join social work because of love for community. And it's a part of, like, you know, not like valorizing the fact that if we're getting paid a lower salary, but it's like, I'm doing this for my community. I'm doing this for my gente, right? Like this is who we are. And so it's more complex than just being like, you know, I'm not going to let them treat me this way, and I'm going to demand a higher salary. Some of it is like, this is the best way that I can be here for my people.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And I want to say that my computer is about to run out of charge. So before it just crashes, I'll probably hop off and be in the chat. But thank you, Heliana. Appreciate you.
Nice to see you.
You too.
Thanks for the questions, Alicia. You know, and it makes me think about social work practicum, because I think some of us come into social work and we have these high ideals, or we imagine social work as something that it's not quite there, if that makes sense. And so my point here is that I think social work students could get their first experience of workplace trauma or workplace abuse in their practicum. And I feel that I've been bullied before at practicum and beyond that. And I'm pretty good at standing up for myself. So if people can bully me, then what could they do to somebody more vulnerable, if that makes sense? And I took over the practicum for our field director left unexpectedly last year, and so we had trouble hiring somebody. So I've been doing it for the last year or so, the last couple semesters. And it still surprises me a little bit that the way that some students get treated. I mean, for the most part, it's good. Don't get me wrong. For the most part, it's good. But sometimes students report certain things about the way that they're being treated or the way that they're being talked to. And I'm like, that's just not right. And then the other side of it is that I think folks that are running practicums, field directors, oftentimes it's adjunct professors, things like that, they're so busy and they have so many students to respond to that it's hard to really take care of them the way that they need to be taken care of. And if that makes sense. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, about, you know, practicum.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So I have such appreciation for our social work students who are out there in practicum. I mean, talk about what practicum students do for the world of social work and for social services is a breath of fresh air. And they tend to bring in energy and questions and thoughts that can really reinvigorate an environment that can sometimes become kind of static and sometimes not do what our beautiful brochures and websites say that we're actually trying to do, right? So we might have beautiful language around like diversity, equity, inclusion, or, you know, healing and liberation, but what actually is happening in practice is that our clients are having really long waits. And by the time they get in to see their clinicians, those folks are overworked and exploited and so on and so forth. So I cannot say highly enough how important our practicum students are for the larger ecosystem of social services. I think that the risk of having somebody become an abusive, psychologically abusive person in a workplace is even higher when their power difference is there. So practicum students are kind of like gonna oftentimes face the greatest power differences because they're not most often not getting paid. But I, definitely want to put a plug out there. I think practicum students should get paid because that's real labor, right? So, just acknowledging all that. But then secondly, their education is tied to what happens in that workplace. And so if there is I'll be polite in my language here. If there's a really jerky person who is on that job site, they can make or break a practicum student, or they can make it seem like they can make or break a practicum student. And that's why I give so much respect to people like yourself, Professor Ace, who are doing that critical work of not only helping people to get into placements, but helping people to understand what their rights are as practicum students, because none of us goes to work to be abused. That's not a thing. Mm-hmm. Whether we're getting paid or not for that, we cannot be abused, and we should not be abused. But it happens frequently. I see it especially with international students. And especially right now with international students, they're really facing all sorts of new power dynamics as well, of course. But I think that there's a real risk, that when somebody is in there as a practicum student, that their boundaries can be violated. They can be asked to do more than is humanly possible. And sometimes, unfortunately, that bullying can come from all directions. It also can sometimes come from clients too, who see a practicum student as having less power in the overall organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Monica in the chat said that she's not sure she's heard many positive practicum stories. And, when you hear something like that from a student, it's like, we need to check ourselves. You know what I mean? If a student can say that they've heard people talk about practicum and they haven't heard many positive stories, then, well, what are we doing, if you know what I mean? And going back to the getting paid part, you're especially vulnerable, because you've put in several years, whether you're a master's student or a senior undergraduate student, you've put in several years into this, a lot of your heart and soul, a lot of your time, you put off your family. Like, well, you can't quit now, right? So you're in there and you're at work and you've got somebody treating you a certain kind of way, whether it's bullying you or taking advantage, manipulating you, all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Then you may feel like you don't have a lot of room to push back, and you may go talk to don't get me wrong, there's probably plenty of field directors that are happy to help and things like that, but there's also some that are just plain busy. And so when someone comes to them, they're like, oh, well, yeah, just stick with it and just hang with it. And it keeps going downhill, and they're thinking, well, what am I going to do? I just, like you said earlier, I just got to trudge on and go through it. And it's just not a good place to be, is it?
No, it's not. And I think that, kind of going back to what we were just talking about with Alicia, there's this thing called stress-induced analgesia, where the mind does not allow the awareness of how serious an injury is while a person is still in danger. And so what can happen is, when we're in a bad work environment that's abusive, whether it's, a practicum or paid gig, post-licensing or post-graduation, we might be like, this is not the best thing, but like, I'm gonna hang in there for a little bit. I'm tough. I've been around, this kind of stuff before, whatever. And we might have a misread of how much that bullying or psychological abuse is already impacting our physical health and our mental health. And what I've come to realize is that when we end up with chronic stress hormone flooding, and it impacts our body and our mental health, that can impact the entirety of our trajectory of our career. And so it really is important early on to very clearly say for oneself what one will put up with or not. In retrospect, I would even argue that there might be some instances where it is better to walk out of a practicum. Of course, best to do it in coordination with the university. I wouldn't just blow a practicum, but I would definitely, engage the university faculty and staff for help. But I might even think about extending my academics for a couple extra months or an extra semester if needed, just so that I wouldn't put myself in a position to be abused, because the damage really can last decades. And unfortunately, people who are really, really abusive in workplaces, some of them will not let a person go. Some of them will be stalking online. I just had a former colleague stalking me this week on my LinkedIn account. So some of these fools, they cannot let us go. They feed off of causing injury to other people, right? They talk about the so-called dark triad, which is Machiavellianism, sociopathy, and narcissism. And when people, and not narcissism personality disorder, like it wouldn't be diagnosable via DSM TR at this point, but like they've got traits, personality traits. And those kind of people, they get off on causing harm to other people. And so I really would be careful, but I would immediately, at the first sign of problems, I would do two things. I would start documenting everything that happens. And secondly, I would reach out to my university contact person and let them know what's happening. Part of, I think, the NASW Code of Ethics, what it does for us is it says that we need to speak out about injustice. And it is an injustice when a job site, when a practicum site is allowing abuse of the practicum students. So speaking up is not only important for ourselves, but for other students who might end up in that practicum in the future.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if you say something to your practicum coordinator, your field director, your professor, or whatever, and you feel like they're just not getting they're minimizing it, maybe you might say, and maybe it's not even intentional. They just didn't grasp what you were trying to say. Keep pushing, send another message, talk to them again and say, look, I don't think that you're understanding me. It's not working. I'm not feeling safe. I'm uncomfortable. Use those words and make sure you say and that they get it, so that something can be done about it. Push them into action. You know what I'm saying? What kinds of things should students that haven't experienced this before, what kind of warning signs might there be?
Yeah. So, part of what I would say is initially I would interview practicum sites. If you have the ability to do so, literally interview them. And one of the questions to ask is, how are the smartest and most talented employees and students treated here? Because a very common dynamic in abusive workplaces is you get an imposter leader. This is somebody who is promoted without subject matter expertise and without managerial training. And they may be good at hiring really talented people, but those talented people end up feeling like an existential threat to the imposter leader. So the imposter leader will start to attack them, isolate them, push them out in one way or another. And so by asking, how are the brightest, the most talented, staff or practicum students treated here is one of those early indicators. The second thing that I would do is I would really ask other students who've gone through that work site before signing up, and being really clear in the interview process what your boundaries are, and hold those boundaries. I'd like to tell people, who cross boundaries? Abusers. That's who does it, right? The rest of us are like, oh, you've got a boundary. It might be inconvenient for me, but I respect you as a human being, so I am not going to cross that line. And just being really clear about that. I think part of the challenge for many practicum students is that they are a lifeline to organizations. Organizations are kind of drowning in client caseload and lack of staffing and other resources. And so when these practicum students come in, it's like, they can kind of keep us afloat, keep us alive. But we need to keep our practicum students healthy and respected as well. So that's the other piece, would be to ask questions like, can you tell me any experiences that your organization has had with other practicum students when challenges came up? How were those addressed? Sometimes practicum students might end up with one understanding of what they're going to be asked to do when they are hired, and then 2 months in, things shift. If you lose funding, how do you see your practicum students filling in the gaps? Some of this is kind of technical, but it can really make a difference, especially right now when our nonprofits are really suffering massive loss of funding. And that's the last thing that I would say, if I may, just be a little long-winded here, which is that there are certain moments when organizations are especially dangerous. They have to do when we lose funding. They have to do when we see mergers or when there are massive changes at the highest level. It's in those times of kind of like shifting Titanic, plates, that suddenly the chasms between them can become much wider and people can fall through. And the first people who are going to fall through are the people who have the least institutional power.
Yeah. And, you were talking a bit ago about, the practicums being unpaid. And sometimes, in some senses, it can be a little bit logical if you're a traditional student and you're coming in and you don't have any work experience. But a lot of the students I work with are non-traditional students. And so they're a little bit older and they're maybe having to quit their job or leave a higher paying job, like obviously higher paying if you're not getting paid, and go maybe almost take a demotion to go and work for free. And then the flip side of that too is that if they're good at what they do and they're responsible and they're a good social worker, very often they just get put to work. You know what I mean? So it's almost abusive in that way because you're having somebody come in and you're treating them like an employee instead of a student who's there to learn from you and with you. And instead you're using them as an employee to do administrative stuff. Or even, when I did my undergraduate practicum, I was with domestic violence offenders and they were like, hey, this is a guy, he's willing to go in the jail and he's willing to do all this stuff. Like, we're just going to give him the rough clients. And I enjoyed it, but I could also see, I also remember times where I felt disgruntled and upset because, hey, I'm in here working for free and I'm doing the heavy lifting for you all. You know what I mean? So it can almost be a negative sometimes if you come into those situations with experience and are able to take on those responsibilities, if you know what I mean.
That's such an important point. I really appreciate you sharing that and just reminding us that, right, the purpose of the practicum is a learning opportunity. And we can have transformative learning, shout out to Bell Hooks and others who have really talked about how the practice and the praxis of our craft and our skill and our relationships, but that piece about how we can be like suddenly set up in a situation where maybe some of the kind of the mythology around social work and like the, these stories of who we are, out in society, then yeah, we could be put in situations that we might not want to speak up about it because there's a risk that, that story might be kind of like cracked at the edges. So for example, you sharing that reminded me, I used to do HIV Hep C prevention in jails, Women's County Correctional Facility, and I would go into what they called main jail, which is in downtown. And I remember like walking in and the sign that said for all visitors, like, if you come in here and there's a riot, we're not coming to get you. And had I not been doing needle exchange before that experience, I don't know that I would have had the awareness and the street smarts to know that while I would always have relationships with women and men who are incarcerated that were based on respect, that's even more important if there's a freaking riot and no one's coming to get me. My ability to survive in that moment is going to be all about my relationships with the people who are in there. And that kind of, oftentimes social work programs may not be preparing our students, especially if they're coming from life experiences where they wouldn't know those kind of political dynamics and stuff. So I think that there's another side of this that's like when we are put into positions where there really are risks involved, that we do prep people as much as possible for those dynamics.
Yeah, absolutely. It's our responsibility, and we need to do a better job of it, for sure. Monica asked a good question in the chat. She says, who's going through her own practicum experience right now, by the way. She says, what would you do if the university is potentially complicit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would contact, there is an advocacy group that is specific to higher ed that's around workplace bullying and abuse. And I will think of it and I will drop it in the chat in a moment. But it's the name of it escaping me right now. Of course, because we're live. That's why it's escaping me. But there's Parity Movement, I think might be what it's called, Academic Parity Movement. But there is a group of researchers, professors, administrators who talk about workplace bullying in university contexts. And so it could be, in a lab, it could be in a classroom, it could be in an academic senate, or it could also be in a job site. And so these folks can help students to really think through, okay, should I go to the university ombudsperson? Should I, what are my different options and avenues right now? But I think importantly, any student who feels like they're facing institutional betrayal, and if I can, I'm just going to take a step back and explain what that term means. Mm-hmm. So whenever we go into a university as a student or a college or a K through 12 classroom, there is an implicit agreement that that learning institution is going to protect us from harm. At the very least. I mean, they should be educating us too, but we're not supposed to go to school and then get hurt. When an institution maintains a system and a situation where the students, the faculty, the administrators are being injured, and they know about that injury, but they continue to, as status quo, oftentimes to protect their own liability rather than doing something to protect the student or the staff person, that's called institutional betrayal, because they are betraying that implicit agreement that they would not harm us, essentially. That any type of betrayal, whether it's from the institution or an individual like a professor or someone else, the betrayal trauma is really significant, and it can impact us differently than other kinds of, financial, like if our financial aid suddenly disappears or something like that. It's a really deep kind of injury. So for anyone who's feeling like we're experiencing a lack of responsiveness of protection from the institution, I would absolutely reach out. I think it is the academic parity movement. And when you come up with your next question, I'll find the link right now and drop it in the chat.
Yeah, and we'll make sure we get that in the description too. And at University of Alaska Fairbanks, I think you can contact the ORCA office as well for these kind of things. And if you're out there, and I said we have some folks in the audience, if you have a question, feel free to pop it in the chat, or if you want to be brave, feel free to join us on screen and request a call in. What do you think I can do, Heliana, to prepare more because I've taught Practicum a couple times, but I've been just thrown into the thrust of it, if that makes sense, kind of with not much time to prep. And I think I do a pretty good job at sharing space for the students and supporting them and things like that. But I really don't have a plethora of background knowledge on specific ways that I can support them, if that makes sense. And so what do you think I can do to support them to make sure that they're safe and that they feel like they have somebody to talk to?
Oh man, that's such a great question. Your students are so fortunate to have you. I just want to put that out there. And shout out to Larry Trujillo, who was the professor of Chicanos for Social Change, who was like what I imagine you are to your students, he was you to me. And I think about him every single day. Like for realsies, like it's amazing that you would even ask that question. I think exit interviews are really great. I think that's really important. So starting to build some institutional knowledge about what it really is like in these job sites. I think that's a part. I think another piece would be to ask students what they're looking for as they enter these sites. Expectation setting is really, really helpful. So, I mean, obviously, like they have to do a practicum to get through the school, but many times people go in with certain ideas as well. I was really, really fortunate. Both of my practicums as an MSW student were amazing. And I also had a field advisor who was incredible. So I want to put out the message that like there are some good practicum sites. These were in St. Louis and in Granite City, Illinois. What made them great was that I was in environments where people really, really cared about diversity, equity, inclusion. And they were open to a student coming in and asking probably fairly obnoxious questions and making like, hey, is it okay to make some suggestions here about some process improvement? Because for who I am, I can't walk into an environment and see injustice and keep my freaking mouth shut. I'm just not good at that. And I'm glad, but I would not want to be sent into an environment that would find me annoying as heck. So, to some extent, and knowing and asking the students, like, what is it that they're looking for? And over time, I mean, you were just thrown into this. So I'm sure, unless you're psychic, and most of us are not, and that's not part of our job descriptions, it's going to take some time to like kind of hear from people what the actual experiences are like. But I appreciate that you're like juggling this, right? So you're teaching and you're doing this other work with like NASW and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I wonder, is it a thing like peer support among the practicum students? Like, do they ever get together and kind of like share stories with one another? I didn't do that as a MSW student, but I wonder what it would have been like if I had had that kind of an opportunity. So that way, like kind of diffusing some of that intensity because you are one person.
Yeah, I have a unique take on we have Practicum seminar where we meet once a week, and I had kind of a yin and a yang experience between BSW and MSW. My MSW was very like formulaic and predetermined everything that we talked about, and like kind of wooden ethical questions that would be okay, but I don't know, I wasn't feeling it. During my undergraduate, I did two things at once. One, I was invited to participate in a predominantly Alaskan Native group called the Rural Human Services. So it was mostly Alaska Native women. and everything was facilitated via talking circles. And I talk about this all the time. I didn't like him at first, and then the longer I spent there, the more I became integrated, and our stories were intertwined. And, we became one, you might say, versus two separate entities. And at the same time, I also had, I just saw her yesterday, actually, at the conference for a moment. Her name's Kim Swisher, and she was just a beautiful Practicum, I guess, field director, and she taught our Practicum seminar. And I don't know if she called it a talking circle, but essentially that's what we did. We sit in a circle for seminar, and we talk. And mostly I just listened to the other students and supported them. But one time I had it's the only time I've ever refused to work with somebody. Like I said, in my undergraduate practicum, I was put to work. I had this big grizzly Alaskan, not native Alaskan, but just this big grizzly Alaskan white guy. And he was misogynistic. He was racist. And, it's one thing you can read domestic violence offenders, their files, but I always try to, just meet them where they're at and learn about their own trauma and try to help them the best that I can and listen to them. But this guy just pushed me to the limits, if you know what I'm saying. Like everything that he said, and I don't know if he thought because I'm another white guy or something that he could say this, but I'm like, no, I'm not sitting here for free, and I'm not doing it anymore. And so I had to stand up for myself, and I had the courage to do that, or maybe the permission almost to do it by sitting in that circle with the other students, listening to me and giving me positive feedback and constructive feedback, and my professor, Kim Swisher, encouraging me to stand up for myself. And I said, I'm not going to do it. And so they said, okay, you don't have to work with this guy. And I forgot where I was going with this. What were we talking about?
I don't know. I was so involved in your story.
Yeah,
That's phenomenal.
I forgot my point.
Phenomenal that you did.
I think my point is that, today, so I use a combination of those, the talking circle with the Alaskan Natives, with what Kim Swisher did, my professor Kim Swisher did with the Practicum. And so every week we have a circle, and I am heartened every single time I hold a circle with my students, because they really, if we go over time, they stay in, they listen to each other, they support each other, they help each other when something wrong is happening or something difficult is happening in their life. They celebrate with each other when it's something good. Anybody that's run, especially any kind of social work class, but especially Practicum, if you ever want to talk to me about how to implement talking circles, I'm so passionate about it. And I would say that I have like a 99.9 positive success stories. And so I love it. And I think it's just been a beautiful way to do it, where students can listen. You can listen to each other. You can learn from each other, share what's on your own heart, unburden your heart if you need to, celebrate with each other. It's just really, really beautiful. That's what I was trying to say.
That's so exciting. I mean, because I feel like part of what we do in Practicum is we become acclimated to not knowing what the heck we're doing. And that's a part of it. Like that, like really, truly, like we're going to have moments. There's only so much that we can learn in school. There's only so much we can read. And there's a wisdom that is developed at a nervous system level, at a spiritual level, that only comes with time. And it comes with different kinds of relationships and trial and error. And social work is messy, and it feels good sometimes, but a lot of times it hurts. It's hard to bear witness to people suffering. It's hard to be so committed to our clients and want so much for their success, and to see these large systems that are unrelenting. It's painful stuff. And so to be able to be with others who are also kind of walking through that, or moving into that, was a very ableist language there, but like who are experiencing these things together, is so helpful. Because I think, at least for me, when I was a Practicum student, I would go into these clinics that I was working in, I was a little bit like afraid that, oh, these are all experts and they know what they're doing. Well, now after so many years of being a licensed social worker, I can tell you, I'm still flying the situations and going like, well, I'm going to try this and I hope it works. And I'm going to try really hard to not harm anyone in the process. But most importantly, I'm going to, hopefully be humble enough that when I screw up, and I will screw up, and I will, for the rest of my life, that my clients feel safe enough to let me know, or my colleagues feel safe enough to let me know, and that I have the internal strength to be like, okay, I messed up. Lesson learned. Let me not do that again, but not crumble at the time. So yeah, I think that I had this sense of like, oh, I'm walking in this place where people have been here for so many years, and they got all these letters behind their names and all this kind of stuff. And I kind of had them up on a pedestal, and I needed to realize that actually the best clinicians out there are flying without necessarily for for sure direction, or that they're having to adjust all the time. Maybe that's the way to talk about it.
Yeah, we have to be. The social work profession has been over professionalized and reduced, to make you think that, oh, my track is only here or here. But I think that the best social workers are the ones that think outside of those boxes or those confines, and are willing to blaze their own path and try something different, because we've already established, just in talking a little bit, that social work is not necessarily where it needs to be or where it should be. You know what I mean? And so sometimes you have to try something different. If you just stick to the same, you just get the same. If you don't, even to invoke Angela Davis again, you got to be able to imagine it. If you can't imagine something different, then it will just stay the same. And so we have to look at things differently. We have to imagine them differently, and we have to try different things. And it's not always going to be accepted. Higher academia and social work specifically doesn't always incentivize that kind of stuff. You have to do it on your own. You have to do it on your own. Then you're not going to get a raise for it. You're not going to get an award for it. You're just going to get, students that had a meaningful experience. And I shouldn't say just that. That's the ultimate reward, but they're the ones that are going to notice, not everybody else all the time. Alicia said, yes, this is why I started an intern practicum group at my organization. So there's a safe space for people to talk about all of these things and be vulnerable. And I hear you, Alicia. People are afraid to talk sometimes, and they get shut down. And I said that with practicum students, right, too, as well. And you talked about exit interviews, and I had a point there I wanted to make, was that we do site visits, and I just do them online via Zoom. And obviously those are beneficial. You're there with there's their supervisor, their AFI, and the student. But, if it's an abusive relationship, it's probably hard to tell the truth if the abuser is looking over your shoulder, if you know what I'm saying. So some kind of other way to make sure students feel safe to tell us. Otherwise, we might never know. I don't even think a survey does it at the end, because you're done with it. You just want to get over, and you're ready to go walk. You're trying to move past it. So we may not even know that we have environments that, that our students that we're supposed to be taking care of and protecting are experiencing abuse.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm so excited also to hear that you bring in the talking circle. So I think part of the professionalization of social work, where we really have done wrong by our communities, is assuming that strategies that have worked in our community since time immemorial suddenly don't work. Like, that's some wildness there, that just because Freud didn't think of it does not mean that it's not a thing. And I think that some of the power of a talking circles are around the nervous system co-regulation that happens when we're in a community that's all at the same level. There's no and there's a way and a flow around it that's so different, that disrupts the power dynamics that would be in an exit interview when you're sitting there with a boss who might have been abusive. It shifts so much of that. And I think that there's a lot that social work as a profession can really learn from many of our cultures. And it's really exciting to hear that your students have the opportunity to experience a professional environment like that from you.
Yeah, I appreciate you and your kind words. It's always uplifting when we share stories with each other and receive positive feedback and affirmations that we're doing what we're supposed to do. And I think if I had any deep reflection about working with students, any profound realizations, it would be that we have to listen to them.
Yes.
For some reason, we don't it's really weird to think about it, but even folks that say, I don't believe in a hierarchy that way, I want to share power and equality, sometimes we have real trouble listening to the ones that are viewed as lower on the hierarchy than us. And it's something that we've really got to work on and I mean that just collectively as a profession. We've got to be able to listen. It's almost like we put them down sometimes. We focus on competence and all that so much, when we need to be focused a little more on humility, accepting that, hey, we have a long way to go and we have a lot of things that we can do better and improve on. And there's no way for us to know that. And there's no way to help and protect our students if we don't listen to them. Listening, sometimes people think listening is just sitting there and whatever, but listening is labor as well. You have to be able to pay attention, and you have to have empathy. You have to try to walk in their shoes a little bit, even if it's hard. But that's what I would say to any professor out there that's trying to connect with their students or provide support. If you have to find your way to listen, because we're all different. We all do things differently. Not everybody got to go and participate in talking circles with Alaska Native elders and whatnot. So you might have to find your own way, or find something that works for you based on what you know and what your experience is, and seek other methods out. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm, it's hard work, but it's good work.
Absolutely. And I feel like it's, in my life, it's been really And I use this term very carefully. In my life, it's really been sacred work, because when I'm able to sit with a client, or I'm able to sit with a student or somebody that I'm learning alongside with as well, like, and we really get a sense of like, it's okay to say the painful stuff right now. What a freaking gift that is. In this world that teaches us that we need to have our dukes up all the time, when somebody is actually like feeling safe enough to say the thing, it's really, I don't know, it's real. It's the realness. There are too many filters going on all over the place. And so we don't have real interactions with people. So it really does feel sacred to me. That's where I feel like I'm closest to my higher power, is in these relationships with other people that are real, where we can have that healing happen. And I think the other side of it for me, and it's taken me a long time to learn this, and it kind of goes to one of my passions that is around suicide prevention. I think the best thing that we can do as clinicians for a client who's experiencing suicidal crisis is regulate ourselves, regulate our own nervous systems. I think the same thing is true if we are faculty, or if we are in, any kind of a support role with students, to listen. We have to be centered enough in ourselves to be able to receive whatever it is that they need to say. If we get all, and it's easy and it can happen. And gosh, there's so many challenges around us all the time these days. I get this sense from you, and I definitely got a sense from also the last conversation with Alicia, that both of you feel like really like centered people. And that makes it feel safer for me to have conversations with you. So I can only imagine that your students have that kind of an experience with you as well. And that's that modeling of like what we hope that the students will be able to do for their clients in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think a lot of folks get into social work have been hurt themselves before, right? And so we get into social work, and if we're hurt ourselves and we don't take care of that in some way, we don't heal ourselves, how can we be expected to help other people do the same? You're going to be thrown into the thrust of, you're going to go to your MSW, you're going to take all your graduate classes in a row, and you're going to have your internship, and then you're going to get out and you're going to have to worry about your licensure and making enough money to pay off your student loans. If you haven't had any healing in there, then you're not going to be ready to help others heal. You're just going to be ready to participate in the service or the commodity of social work as it's becoming in some ways, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I joined the profession of social work because it was the only profession that had social justice in the code of ethics at that time. It was many years ago, but at that time was, so that's why I became a social worker. But as I started learning about the history of social work, I was like, ooh, what am I doing? And I worked for many, many summers on the Tana Reservation in southwestern Arizona. And, social workers in a lot of our communities, social workers walk in and people scatter, because social workers are known to abuse power and to be an extension of the state. And so I really had to do a lot of soul searching and grappling with like, who will I work for or not? How will I? And I think to your earlier point about the importance of us healing, when we do not heal, it creates the danger that we will abuse power against our clients. And so that thing of like doing no harm, it starts with healing ourselves first.
Yeah. Working with domestic violence offenders, when I was in my undergraduate practicum, what do you see when you see the offenders? Well, if you look backwards, you see there's somebody offended on them most of the time. And then it doesn't excuse it, just shows you the why. And so the same thing happens to social workers. You know what I mean? You've been abused, you get there, you maybe even experience more abuse on the way. And by the time you get there, maybe you didn't even have the opportunity or know. Some people might not know that you can do the healing. And you get to the point, and then you are that totally unintentionally. You wake up, and that's where you're at. You become hardened. I think you see this with police officers as well, and in other circumstances, you come in and you want to change things, but you become hardened by, and it could be because the old heads in there too are, have that attitude, and you didn't want to be like that. It bothered you at first, but you've been there a long time now, and that's who you end up becoming. And so you have to be vigilant, and you have to have self-awareness, do some shadow work, and reflection and all of that. It's hard work for sure. I have my old mentor who's still mentoring me from beyond these days. Her name is grandmother Rita Blumenstein. She's a Yupik elder and healer. And she'd say, you can't learn if you have a burden on your heart. And so that's what I start every circle with, or I try to remember to start every circle with. If you have a burden that you need to unload on your heart, something you need to talk about, then this is the place for it. It's just not about, learning about theory or whatever. It's a place for you to be, to share what's on your heart, to unburden yourselves, because then you can learn more effectively if you've had an opportunity to unburden yourself, if you know what I mean. We don't do enough of that. Sometimes we're just the banking model of education and social work. We're just throwing them and feeding them this and this and this, and hey, you passed the exam and so on. And we don't take time to really get to the nitty gritty of it. What's really going on? What's really important?
Yeah. Oh, that's so powerful. And what a powerful person to be still impacting you from the other side. And so acknowledging and honoring of her as well. I think that it's really dangerous in helping professions when we have workplace abusers, because they can be some of the most, they'll say things like, well, I would never hurt anyone. I'm a social worker. I couldn't hurt anyone. I'm a doctor, right? And so there's a way in which the identity as a helper, as a do-gooder, can be used to mask the real danger. And psychological manipulation campaigns that are type like gaslighting and race lighting and these kinds of things are more likely to take root, because we're both social workers in this situation, and people can use the language that's so common in our profession and, weaponize things like standard of care and these kinds of terms, and actually in ways that are very, very dangerous for us. So that professionalization, we need to kind of keep an eye on it, I think, for a few reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Alicia's contributing in the chat here. She says, do you have any suggestions for people who do struggle with nervous system regulation when they're in that situation with someone who is suicidal? Perhaps some easy to implement, accessible tips for students who have never used self-regulation strategies?
Yeah, great question, Alicia. Thank you. Yeah, so the first thing that I do when I'm meeting with somebody who is experiencing suicidal crisis is I just center myself. I'm going to be taking some longer breaths, longer exhalations. I'm going to be really aware of like, how am I sitting? Where is my sit bone? How can I get myself as comfortable as possible so that I can be paying attention to the person? I'm making sure that my phone is not buzzing right next to me. I'm making sure that I can really just focus in on what they're doing, because in that moment, if they are not actively harming themselves, in that moment, it is still a thought. And there's a lot of conversation out there about how social workers, when we are informed that somebody's having suicidal ideation, we got to like call 988. We got to get them to an emergency room. But these systems are very commonly causing harm to people, right? I mean, so when we have higher rates of law enforcement who show up when a 988 call was made, and it is a Black person who's experiencing mental health crisis and they are shot, that is obviously a crisis care system that has not only failed, but is dangerous. And we see higher rates of chemical restraint used against Black people and Indigenous people. We see ICE being called in and so on. And so the best thing that we can do, I think, is to remind ourselves that in this moment, the person's not harming themselves. So in this moment, we have an opportunity to help them to settle themselves so that we don't need to engage other systems. Now, if a person's at a point where they absolutely have to go somewhere safe, then they need to go somewhere safer. And it is important to know the difference between the two. But I think there's an overinflation of an idea that our licenses will be jeopardized if we don't get a person immediately to the emergency room. And the reason why that logic happens is because it assumes that the emergency room is a place where they're going to get help. And oftentimes that's not the case. And I don't know what it's like in Alaska. I can guess that emergency rooms are probably pretty darn packed. And when they're triaging heart attacks and auto accidents and other kinds of things, a person who shows up with suicidal crisis could end up sitting for hours, if not days, without any kind of help. And so I really encourage, another thing that helps the clinician's nervous system stay settled, before we go into clinical encounters with people, do a little bit of extra homework. Find out, is there a peer respite center, an alternative to an emergency room, alternative to locked psych facilities that a person can go to? Are there mobile crisis units? Who can I call that is not going to automatically engage law enforcement? Having those resources before we enter the situation can be really, really helpful. The second piece I would say to that is asking the person, what can I do right now to help you feel as safe as possible? It all goes down to safety. It's always about their sense of safety and your sense of safety as a clinician. Can we pause and get some water? Do you need a blanket? Can we turn off your cell phone? How can we reduce the sounds and other inputs that will increase our sense of stress rather than decrease our stress? That's for us as well as for the client that we're working with.
Yeah. Do you think when you are working with somebody that you think maybe thinking about suicide, considering suicide, do you think it's important to be direct? Do you think it's important to explore ambivalence? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we absolutely have to be asking people directly, are you having thoughts of self-harm? So the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, there are several really well-validated, short questions that can be asked to assess a risk factor. And those are really, really important to use and use directly, and to have a clear awareness of how to do a risk assessment. If a person does not have access to means and they're having the thought, so part of it is that when the nervous system crashes because there's too much too fast or too soon, or there's too little support for too long, the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain, goes offline, and it's all amygdala, the brain's alarm system. When the alarm system starts going, the ability of the person to imagine alternatives goes offline. And so this is why we're talking about the nervous system regulation. We want to slow down everything and interrupt the stress hormone flooding so that the person can start to imagine alternative options. Most people who are in a suicidal crisis actually, as you mentioned, have quite a bit of ambivalence. What they want is the pain to stop. At that moment, the only thing that the brain can imagine is death as the option. For many people, if we can slow things down a little bit, if we can attend to what they physically need in that moment to feel as safe as possible, we can start to imagine some alternatives. And it doesn't mean that we're able to fix the major problems in the person's life. Maybe they're about to be evicted. Maybe they just lost their job. Maybe they lost access to their kids or whomever, whatever it might be. That big thing is not going to change immediately. But when we can slow down, then we can start to do some safety planning, which research shows us is quite effective in a lot of communities to help us interrupt the nervous system flooding from stress perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's especially relevant here for Alaska when we're talking about safety and helping keep them safe in a safety plan. Because what do we have? I bet you can guess. What do we have a lot of in Alaska? Guns. And a lot of it is for subsistence hunting. I'm not in here for the gun debate or anything right now. A lot of Alaska Native folks have guns because they're going hunting, and they use it to subsist on. So no diss there. The point of them. So for example, I lived up north for several years, and it was called Barrow then, but they've readopted or reclaimed their traditional name. It's called Utqiagvik now, up on the Arctic Ocean with predominantly a Inupiaq Eskimo community. There's guns everywhere. They have, it's called Arctic entryway. They call it a kanichuk, to keep the cold air out. So there's a room where you take your, just like Hawaii, there's a no shoes culture type of thing when you go in the house. And that's where a lot of folks keep their guns and their rifles and things like that. And so I know of let's just say this. I know of too many incidents to count where somebody I knew was maybe had some drinks, too many drinks, and they had access to a gun and they were, feeling it. And they did an irreversible act. Matter of fact, just one of my very best friends for a long time, his name was Ben Hobson, called him B3. And, he shot himself in the face, I don't know, 6 months ago or something like that. I don't know how long it's been, maybe a year ago. But my point here is that there's been too many instances like that. It makes me very uncomfortable to even think about it. Like how often, that's just the people I know, let alone how often it happens. And what can we do to help protect folks that, maybe in the throes of depression or feeling down or thinking about suicide, and they have access to a weapon where, like I said, I think that if they had a day, if they could make it to tomorrow, that it wouldn't happen.
Yeah. So, okay. So, I mean, I think to Alicia's question as well, Alicia, I'm doing it. I start rocking. That is one thing that I do immediately to help my nervous system to stay real present. And so that's something that all clinicians can do, and we can encourage clients to do this with us. And I just want to acknowledge, and I'm very sorry for your friend's passing. And I hear you, Professor Ace. it happens so fast. And many people who have survived suicide will say things like, there was a moment when suddenly they wanted to take back that decision. And so that ambivalence piece is really important. I also lost a friend this year, Dave, who I don't know if he went out because he was having a really good time and it was like an F it shot kind of deal, or if it had gotten too much. I don't know. I know that it can happen to anybody. Literally anybody can be backed into a situation where eventually the brain tells them the only way to stop the pain is through death. It can happen to any of us. It's not something we can pray our way through. It's not something that we can, steel ourselves up against. It's just something that the brain does. It's a mammalian response. When we add drugs and alcohol, it can really make a difference. It can take down our inhibitions. And suddenly we might feel a little bit braver to do the thing that we wouldn't do if we were sober. There's also, when people are coming down from different kinds of things, somebody might be doing some MDMA and having a really good time. And then when they're coming down, that lack of serotonin in the come down process can increase the risk of suicide. Our SSRIs, my gosh, we have got so many SSRIs that antidepressants that it literally says on the label, this can increase suicidal ideation. So, I think, so you heard me do it right there. Because I'm aware, ooh, Ramirez, you're getting pumped up about this. Okay, so take it down. I think the first thing that's really, really important is if we're having a hard time, we want to separate bullets from guns. We got to do this. We just got to do it. It's really important to have locked cases. It's really important, if we don't have locked cases, to have gun locks. And we can get them for free. If folks are veterans, you can get them for free at the Veterans Affairs. If we're going through a hard time, maybe ask a buddy to hold on to our guns for a couple of days. I'm not saying get rid of them. It's not my business. I'm not trying to get in other people's business. But what I am saying is that I know enough about our brain that sometimes our brains will do these little tricks on us. And like you said, if we can just get through that day, tomorrow might feel a little bit different. There might be some, but there's, what do they say? It's there's only one last feeling. It's the final feeling. But as long as we can allow ourselves, and I tell people when I'm engaging with folks who are experiencing suicidal ideation, that choice can always be there. That choice can always be there. We don't have to make it right now. What can I do right now to make your belly feel full? What can I do right now to help you just to get through this excruciating moment? Sometimes, Professor Ace, it's tell me about that music that you used to get down to. Let's go there for a second. Maybe it's the music that your mama or your grandmama used to play for you. Or tell me about those foods. What did you used to eat? Any time that you ever felt a little bit safer and you ever felt a little bit more comfortable, let's start talking about those foods. I did a suicide safety plan one time with a veteran. He had served in Vietnam and he was mixed race, Indigenous and Mexican ancestry. And we talked about, I'm just trying to think about how much information I want to share because I don't want to activate the audience. But essentially what I did was when he would have recurrent suicidal ideation, it always involved one kind of means. And it was in a certain part of his house. And so I knew enough about his history that he had done what he referred to as a vision quest. I don't know what the term it would be in his community, but that's what he told me because I'm not part of the community. And so for folks who are not familiar, it was going out into the wilderness with somebody who was leading. He sat in a certain place for a very long period of time. And eventually he had an image of what he described as a sentient being who was looking over him, who was with him. And so I said, okay, let's get a picture of that mountain where that happened. And let's put that mountain in that place where you have these thoughts. Okay, now tell me about the sweat lodges that you go to. I want to know every single sensation. What does it sound like? But tell me about the sound of the water splashing against the grandfather rocks. Tell me about how it feels on your skin when you leave that sweat lodge out into the night sky, right? How does that temperature difference feel? What does it sound like when you're hearing the prayers and the circles and literally getting into sound, smell, taste, touch, right? All of our five senses, because the brain does not know the difference between the past and the present. So literally getting him into and writing this in his safety plan, that when he started to have those feelings that are overwhelming, I was like, you can always go back to your culture, right? Not everybody has that experience, but for those of us who have that blessing, we can always go back to that. So I would say that part of it also, suicide prevention, is learning about the culture of our clients and learning about the things that they can always tap back into to help ground their nervous systems.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. We got to get out of here soon. I got to go join my students, but Alicia, I just wanted to put this in here. Alicia wrote in the chat, for any folks in Juneau or Fairbanks, you can call the non-emergency police line to connect with the mobile crisis team. I looked up some stats, and in August, the Fairbanks mobile crisis team had 147 calls, and only 10% of those ended up at the hospital, which just shows how impactful it can be just to have someone to be with you, to listen and co-regulate. Hospitalization is not always needed. And that's another thing that I always try to relay to my students, especially the seniors that are in, starting practice and all that, is sometimes all you just need to do is be there for someone. When I used to work with really troubled kids, one of my best go-tos, when all the people would be talking to them, what do you need? What do you need? What's wrong? And they, would be hiding in the corner. And I'd say, get the hell out of here. And I'd go sit next to them and not say anything. And eventually they'd sit up and they'd talk, if you know what I mean.
Yes. Yes, because you're a human who's there to witness and sit with and not run away from. That is, yes, there is medicine in our presence. That gives me shivers thinking about that. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Just a quick question. What do you think about, I have a practicum student and I had one last year too, that's placed with a police department. So they're riding around on calls and supporting, I don't know if you say supporting the police, but, providing an alternative person for the people that are going through a crisis to talk to. And I see a little bit of the pros and cons of it. I think it can be challenging for the social worker to go in those environments sometimes. But I also see the huge benefit in having someone else there to talk to folks that are struggling.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What do you think about social workers going on police calls, working with the police department, like a police department hiring a social worker?
I mean, I think social workers should be everywhere. I think that when our social workers are liberationists, social workers, that the world needs us everywhere. I think it's a really probably very hard position for a social worker to be in, because the National Association Social Workers Code of Ethics you're going to see a whole bunch of stuff that's going to be like, woo, that's a lot of decisions you're going to have to make. I mean, I am an abolitionist. I really, really, really am interested in solutions that do not cause further harm. I am also absolutely about respecting self-determination of everybody else around me. So if there is a social work student who wants to ride with the police, okay, I want to figure out, like, what do you need to have your needs met and to be as safe as possible. And if I'm in an advisory position, I'm also like, and are you aware of the risks that you're going to face too? And there are risks everywhere we go. I think as a social worker, if I am a social worker in community and I'm seen riding around with the police, that's going to really impact how people are going to interact with me after that. But I also know I have never lived in Alaska. I have no idea what the dynamics are like. I have read Life Beside Itself, which was a really powerful book that was talking about suicide in Indigenous communities. And it blew the waters out of what most suicidologists are talking about from a white, middle class, heterosexual, cisgender perspective. So I don't know, what do you say to the student who is writing with law enforcement? It's interesting.
Well, I guess I don't have anything to do with them being placed there. I'm here to support them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
As they're going through it. So I don't say anything specific to them. I know that I would say that it depends a lot upon that student's personality and, what kind of background they have and their ability to, I don't know, most social work, I shouldn't say all social workers, but most social workers are going to lean, more towards a liberal point of view and, on the left side of the aisle. And so there's going to be points of discomfort there for sure and whatnot. But then again, I'm glad that student is there sometimes to talk with the person who, for whatever reason the police were called there. We all know of incidents that have happened in our nation where somebody was called for a crisis and they ended up dead. And obviously we don't want that happening. And if social work can prevent that, then so be it. I think there's, some of the larger issues that you mentioned, which I guess we don't have so much control over all that. But something else that I hear when we're talking about suicide is we talk about the pain, right? The pain is unbearable and this and that. And then we connect it to drugs and alcohol. And then, I talk about this presentation we're doing tomorrow. And one of the things that we find about people that chronically use drugs or can be considered addicted to drugs is that it's not just the drug. And when we ask, like, why are you using the drugs? It's the wrong question. We should be asking, why the pain? Or what's so painful that using the drugs is better? So I just think that, and when we combine that with suicide, you can see why people might think about ending their lives or might even go through with it. Then we can also see why, because they're often on substances when they do it, we can see why they were using the substances, because it's like Tupac says, if I wasn't high, I'd probably try to blow my brains out. Or he says, I take a puff from the blunt to take the pain away. Things like that to reduce the stress is another lyric. And so telling us exactly why they do it, but there's the pain there. And what it tells me is that we live in a society and a culture, like the broader American Western culture, that just has so much pain that's unresolved. It can be tied to history. It could be tied to our parents. It could be passed down intergenerational, but just life is hard to go through all the things. And so we're all walking around with pain, and do we really have an outlet for it? When I talk to those domestic violence offenders, a lot of those guys, I was like, they're not going to want to talk to me. But the truth is they did want to talk to me because nobody had ever listened to them before, if that makes sense. And so if you have all that pain and you, like I said, you're carrying it all around, and you don't have anybody to talk to or to listen to, then what's going to happen with that? It's going to get embodied. It's going to be stored in your body and your mind and your consciousness and your heart. And that's when that cycle continues, if you know what I mean. So the pain.
100%. 100%. And it can feel like we can't take any more of the pain. And what somatic practices have taught me is that there are ways to metabolize that pain so it doesn't obliterate us. There are ways that we can move our bodies. There are ways that we can expose ourselves. Okay, so I'm working on a harm reductionist guide about how to get high and stay alive on the edge of Armageddon. Because look, people are going to be getting high a lot more these days. And I don't think that people are aware that with drug setting, our setting is changing a lot right now. And so of course people are in more pain. Of course people are going to look for ways. Since time immemorial, humans have always done this. We've always used substances in different ways. So, and most people are not actually trying to go out when they overdose. Most of it's not intentional. So I'm really interested in thinking about, and I don't think that dissociation is necessarily bad. I think that our brains are created this way for a reason. Sometimes we do need to check out a little bit. How can we increase the extent to which people check out in ways that are healthful and that minimize the potential harms? And for some people, abstinence is the way to live. Absolutely. And I love that for folks. And there are other people who make other choices. And there are other people who are not even aware that the frequency with which they pick up their cell phones and look at their apps and everything like that they're having releases of dopamine and serotonin from the, tech oligarch and all that oligarchy crap. So they're addicted too. We are all using substances to some extent or another to change the chemicals in our brains. So I'm really interested in conversations where we can just get honest about that and not pathologize one another for it, and figure out, well, how can we reduce our suffering and survive as best as we possibly can.
Yeah, very beautifully said. If we can reduce the suffering in ourselves and the people that we work with, the people around us, then we're doing something. We're doing something important. Well, before we get out of here, tell us about this Latinx suicide prevention document we got here.
Oh my gosh. To any of my gente who are out there, I just have so much love for us and our people right now. We can help each other stay safer in community. I know a lot of Latinx folks are not calling crisis lines. They're not going to hospitals. They're not getting help because of a fear that ICE will be called. And so this guide is about literally what we can do if a family member, if a friend, if a coworker says that they're in so much pain that the only way they can think about going forward is to not be alive anymore, how we can help them, how we can do that nervous system regulation that Alicia was asking about. They're pretty simple questions. And the example that you gave of just sitting next to someone. There's no magic wand here. It's just about how do we be present with a person so that their body can absorb the stress hormone flooding and bring that prefrontal cortex back online. So this guide has a variety of resources for Latinx community, by and for immigrants. There's also pages in there about like what to do if ICE shows up at your home or if ICE shows up at your job site. If you are an immigrant, and if you have no papers, and if you have papers, or if you're a citizen, it's different. So if you're a citizen, you would not call, and you run into with ICE, you don't call an immigration attorney, you call a civil rights attorney. And so there are pages in there as well about like know your rights if you have citizenship, know your rights if you don't have citizenship, because everybody does have rights in the United States. And yeah, so I really hope that it will be shared far and wide. My colleague, Kelechi Oboso, who is one of my co-authors on this, and I have also just recently published a Black community suicide prevention guide, keeping each other safer in community as well. And really, it's talking also about the historical piece, right, of how suicide has come up over the ages with different experiences of oppression and how our community has always responded in different ways. So there's a long history of our communities taking care of one another. And so we're tapping back into that cultural strength as well.
Yeah, so beautiful. And Monica said, thank you so much for creating this. So important right now. Gracias. And I will share that with my students. I'll put it in our modules, and then I'll put it in the episode descriptions as well. And here I was going to share I think Alicia has your website on here from last time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I really appreciate, for folks who want to check out. So I founded this company, Workplace Trauma Recovery LLC, which is about supporting workplace abuse survivors in self-help, like knowing what your rights are, knowing how to defend yourself. I am very serious about self-defense. We need to be able to be caring for ourselves and one another right now. And in the workplace, there are specific things that we can be doing to protect ourselves and one another. So thank you for sharing that. And I hope folks will reach out. I have an ethic of making things as accessible as possible. So if there's a price point on something that you need, let me know if it doesn't work, especially if you're a student and what have you. Like, I really want to make things as accessible as possible. I'm totally into barter economy as well. So whatever I can do to help out.
Yeah, sweet. I love it. The barter economy. You don't hear people talk about that too much. Gift economy, barter economy. I actually had matter of fact, Cache, our mutual friend, mutual sibling. They interviewed Alicia and I on a podcast a while back, and they asked me, what do I see? I can't remember what the question was, but what do I see for a beautiful future or something like that? And I was like, what's coming to me right now is a gift economy. That's what would be a beautiful future. But anyways, we got to get out of here. We're going to go over to the university with the students, and we're going to work on our presentation. I came into this morning thinking I'm tired and I got a lot of stuff to do, and I'm going to try to get this down to an hour. But the reason I didn't is I just so much enjoyed this conversation and talking to you and hearing your perspective. And I just want to say, many thanks to you for being who you are, Heliana. And thank you for taking the time out of, I know, your very busy schedule, your busy day, to share your time, share the space, share your wisdom, your experience with me, with my students. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the students have too, and those that will listen after. So just big thank you for being you. I really appreciate you as a human being and as one of my newfound friends. So I look forward to how we can work together moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was really a powerful conversation, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. And Alicia, it's because of people like you two that I'm like, yeah, I'm proud to be a social worker. I'm proud like this, and we need to bring that pride out and challenge these systems. So thank you. Thank you for leading the way.
Thank you. Eliana, I'll get this up and post it in the next couple of weeks. And I appreciate you, and I'm sure that we'll be connecting soon. Have a great day. Peace.
Thank you. You as well.
Goodbye.